Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Wong. Today, I'm with a special guest, Maddie. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi. Yes, it's great to be here. My name is Maddie Daianu, and I'm leading data and AI at Credit Karma. I have a team of about 100 plus data scientists, machine learning engineers, data practitioners, and I also own the experimentation platform. And we are infusing data and AI in the core product offerings for Credit Karma.
Now, I know that Credit Karma collects a lot of data. So, can you tell us a little bit more on like how you guys were able to collect and gather and clean like first party data? Because it intrigues me how like large organizations maintain their data sets.
Absolutely. I will say this, Tony, that data and AI have been part of the genesis and DNA of Credit Karma from day one. And that has been the case for over 10 years, which really positions Credit Karma in a more competitive way. We have over 100 million members that use Credit Karma. And over the years, we've been able to collect a lot of information for our members that essentially enable us to truly personalize the financial journeys that we help them with. The main capabilities that my team specifically develops and owns is in the space of machine learning, primarily recommendation systems that enable us to use that rich data about our members and put in front of them offerings that meet them where they are in their financial journey and address an acute pain point. And especially now with the advent of Gen AI, we are able to take this to the next level.
Like myself, I use Credit Karma, so it's kind of cool to get on there and get recommended like which credit card's the best for me, and that's all built on like recommendation engines. So can you walk us through like how recommendations engines have like evolved since back in the day up until now?
Yes, absolutely. So I will say that I have the perspective evidently for 2 years that I've been at Credit Karma, but going back in the day, I believe that there's been quite a bit of evolution, especially as we scaled machine learning and AI at various companies, right? First and foremost, starting with data, as you pointed out initially, being able to like clean your data and make it consumable by recommendation engines that scale across a very large population is actually like a very hard job. And in fact, we are actively building and we have been building something called a unified consumer profile that enables us to be able to say, Tony has traversed this journey in his financial depiction within using Credit Karma. And we are able to take that journey and infuse the right recommendation given where you are in that journey. But that takes years and years of investment. And of course, there's a lot of evolutions on the machine learning side, like the ranking models have to continue evolving and being able to essentially lean into some of the latest technologies on how you intersect data with the latest ranking, but also with a system modularity. The app has to be nimble enough to be able to modularize and intersect and interject with the recommendations at the right time is also an evolving landscape. So bringing all these three pieces together has been a journey that we've been on over the years, and we continue evolving.
Now, at a lot of organizations, what I find is that a lot of them have like one really clean data set, and then like the rest of their data is like siloed or like segmented. Can you walk us through like how you guys overcame a lot of like the problems with like trying to organize the first party data? Because I'm assuming that a lot of our listeners struggle with that where like a lot of their data is segmented or siloed, and so they build things on top of these like segmented siloed data sets, and then it's just kind of putting bandages on top of bandages. Like, how have you guys been able to overcome like these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very real problem that I think many companies, especially larger companies or medium size, are dealing with. And for many, including for Credit Karma, data is our competitive advantage. So we've invested quite a bit of time in looking through this problem. I will say that I'll focus in on the user side of the database, but there's also, when you think about recommendation systems and engines, the item side or like what you recommend, in this case, an offer. That's also critically important. At the end of the day, especially when you speak about recommendation systems, both the user and the item that you end up offering is a pair that you have to have very clean data for. But at the end of the day, the biggest and largest data is going to be about our users. So something that we found that is tremendously important is we were not able to, for instance, reconstruct a time series of your journey across the years that you've been using Credit Karma. For instance, say that you took out a loan 3 years ago, and then you took out a credit card 2 years ago, and then you ended up buying a home a year ago. We wanted to be able to say that about Tony, that we were able to essentially reconstruct that information about you using your data and your engagement within the app. So for that, we had to essentially put together what I mentioned, a unified consumer profile that looks at all levels of data, the most raw, and what I mean by that, unprocessed, all the way to derivative forms of your data, including, for instance, a machine learning prediction about a potential intent that you may have or a potential engagement that you've engaged within the app. So being able to look at the data stack end to end, from the most raw level of data all the way to the highest derivative, is one aspect that needs to be done and thought of as you depict the life cycle of the data. The second very important piece is it's important to get fresh information. The information about you needs to be streaming. And what I mean by that is now we are part of Intuit. And whenever, for instance, you conduct your taxes, and you may be a Credit Karma user as well, we want to know that you've done that with TurboTax, of course, upon you giving consent, and be able to reflect that information for you on the Credit Karma app. And that needs to be done in real time. So infusing a real-time element in this unified consumer depiction is also very important. And then third, I don't know how many listeners deal with multi-cloud integrations. We are, as mentioned, part of Intuit. They use AWS, we use GCP. So you have to be very thoughtful about how do you build centralized, durable data systems, and importantly, data products that a multi-cloud user base can use. Because at the end of the day, we want to enable data consumers and producers alike to engage with a system that is at their disposal. So there's a lot of elements that have to go into the architecture of building the right data system.
Yeah, I gotta give you guys a lot of credit because connecting like AWS to GCP is not like a one-to-one pairing. Like a lot of like the services on AWS, like AWS Kendra, is not compatible with say something on GCP. So like you guys spend over I have to imagine like a couple of years in order to integrate both systems into like a multi-cloud general foundational layer that like and interacts with each other. So how do you like ensure like the data quality and the governance when you're operating at that large scale of like say 140 million users while still maintaining that agility needed for like innovation?
Absolutely. Data quality is one of the biggest hurdles that prevent, especially internal users of that data, to apply it and use it with high accuracy. And then at the end of the day, the member or the user will then see a product offering that might not be 100% accurate. And we don't want to do that. That loses trust, right, with the member base. So one thing that Intuit has done, it developed this 4-star and 5-star governance layer that essentially sets the standards for how clean the data needs to be. And that is essentially looking at this life cycle that I just depicted for you in terms of the data discovery, the data taxonomy, the data movement components, all the way to like the data landing into the centralized system, making sure that it abides by this 4 or 5-star, depending on where it is in its life cycle, guideline to ensure that it's governed properly. Without that, we cannot graduate any form of data, raw or processed, into this system.
And then like what's your like framework for deciding when you should be building some type of AI capability in-house versus partnering up with a vendor or like even just acquiring like a third party?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for Credit Karma and Intuit, but maybe like any company for that matter, it always goes back to first principles, which is what is your competitive advantage? And how do you position that in a way, especially as you think about harnessing the power of AI? So as mentioned, for us, it's in our data. So we want to make sure that for extremely high personalization, especially for building on top of our recommendation systems, which is our bread and butter. We can build that in-house because we already have the system, right? And we can apply, in this case, what I like to call embedded experiences on top of the system that use LLMs in the background for contextualizing why you're seeing an offer, how you should interpret the offer that we show you based on where you are in your life cycle. So all of that we build in-house. Now, there's also other pieces that you want to think about in terms of, for instance, the advent of conversational AI. We know and we see this quite a bit with a massive growth in this space, that more and more users are potentially going away from traditional apps, especially non-AI native apps, to using conversational AI interfaces like OpenAI's, Gemini's, Anthropic's, and the list goes on. So you want to be very thoughtful about how you position yourself in being able to take advantage of this evolving technology and also shift, if you may, in user behavior. So, for instance, we can, of course, adopt some of these platforms that are available for adoption internally, but we also have to think about how do we evolve our strategy to make sure that we keep in mind how the user behavior is traversing. And I'll say one last piece is sometimes what I see happens is we are overfitting some of the solutions to using Gen AI. And we shouldn't, right? Because there's some very specific problems that traditional ML and traditional AI can solve, like recommendation systems. Traditional ML is really good at that, like predicting intent or classifying something that is particular to our members. So we should lean into existing traditional ML systems instead of overfitting the problem, because then you're dealing with yet another set of complexities around hallucinations and a set of other evaluation pieces that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, I keep telling people that if you can like solve a solution with a more deterministic method, like take that approach, rather than like using Gen AI, which is like a probabilistic methodology, you can always get closer to that higher accuracy. And I always tell people like, just try to build as much as you can using regular data engineering. And then at the end, you could do like the summarization, right? But you don't want to like build your entire platform as like a Gen AI powered, because you can't hit the 100%, like close to 100% accuracy, because
Exactly.
it's based on probability. So I keep telling people that, and also like right now Gen AI is it's I would say like a lot of it is like a test and learn, like you kind of have to test it and try things out. So what is your approach to like balancing this like research oriented approach with like production focused, trying to get things into prod on like such a large team?
Yeah. I will say that taking a step back, we have to think about what industry you're in. Credit Karma operates in the fintech industry. And that means that we are highly regulated. We have very strict compliance guidelines to abide by, and our answers are held to a very high bar. We have to be 100% accurate. We are giving financial advice to people, so we can't give them the wrong answer. So, with that in mind, whenever we develop especially Gen AI infused capabilities, we have made evaluation frameworks central to our stack. And what I mean by that, there's 5 different metrics that we look at. And without crossing and passing those metrics, we are not able to like launch anything into production. One is a product metric, is for instance, an LLM infused feature depicting the point of view that the company has. We want to sound like Credit Karma. We don't want it to sound more generic. So that takes some adaptation. The second metric is safety. As you mentioned, there's quite a bit of concern with potential injections or toxicity or harmfulness. We want to make sure that no freeform or summarization component has any of that. Then there's compliance. Very important. We want to make sure our partner brands are represented as they should with 100% accuracy. And then there's data accuracy metrics. We know that LLMs hallucinate. So we want to make sure that the answers that we provide our members are 100% accurate, especially when it comes to doing math. And then finally, there's like the system integration, which is it calling the right RAG tools? Is it accessing the right data? what is the latency and cost ramifications, and the list goes on. So we made this very central to how we launch anything that is Gen AI specific. And without checking these boxes, we don't put something in production. And one other thing that we did that might be of interest is we are also doing something called silent testing. So unlike for traditional ML, we built a system where we invoke an LLM-based response whenever the user interacts with our app, but we don't show that to the user. We essentially invoke it so we can collect that information and see what behaviors and statistics are prevalent to our member base. And then we evaluate that in essentially a non-production environment before we build the confidence to put something in front of our members.
Yeah, I'd say that like in my experience, because I work in the healthcare space, so I deal with like HIPAA and it's also highly regulated. That there's financial implications if the language model gets things wrong, right? Like you can get audited, you get fined. So having like a, a check and balance system where there's like human in the loop. I mean, like a lot of folks don't realize this, but with AI systems, you always have to have human in the loop in order to like make sure that the data is always like as accurate as possible, especially in like highly regulated industries. It's like how do you measure and like communicate that business value of like these AI initiatives that you built to like senior leadership, like executive leadership, when you're going out and trying to get like long-term investments for your strategies.
Yeah, it is tough. I'm not going to say it's tough. Having said that, it is very important to depict the picture that we are dealing with and the trends, both external and internal to the company. First, internally speaking, as mentioned initially, we have a very solid AI system that's traditional ML that has led and demonstrated a lot of value. So luckily, I don't have to sell the value of that anymore because it's known. And we can essentially invest in demonstrating how we can build on top of this, and not only take this to the next level, but also create net new components that at some point we would not be able to do with traditional ML. So being able to tell that story is important, but being able to like also contextualize why it's critical for us to have, for instance, a solid evaluation framework so that we protect our members' data, so that we can protect our partners is another point of empathy that I build with senior leadership while essentially depicting the potential impact that, say, a contextualization or summarization feature can have, in addition to like some other more standalone pieces. So I think telling the narrative is so important. And it depends on where each leader starts. Some leaders might be in a different position where they might have to get the buy-in for why data and ML is important. But having and building on that platform, I think most companies or many companies already have that established understanding, and building on top of that would be great.
Now you guys over at Intuit have launched a new product. Can you guys like disclose what that is?
Absolutely. So Intuit has been working on what's called a generative AI operating system. This is not necessarily new, but we keep launching new features on a quarterly basis. This is something that Intuit has invested in from the get-go, especially with the advent of Gen AI. And the whole point of this is to have a platform that's democratizing how one can use generative AI across the company. It has multiple components in it. It has a Gen OS, we call it Gen OS in short, workbench where developers or data scientists can go in and explore a wide range of commercially available and open source LLMs. They can also lean into more generic evaluation metrics, get guidance on prompt engineering, and also think about the hybrid combination of AI and Gen AI. And then we have a runtime component where you can start putting this intelligent AI layer together so you can start prepping that for production usage. We also have a module that helps us with security, fraud, and risk. As mentioned, that's very important as part of the guardrails that we set upon anything that we productionize, but also with the testing of a Gen AI feature. And then finally, it has also a cool feature about UX. So designers and front-end engineers can go and employ widgets and other generative AI components and start visualizing and building products with those in mind. So this has really helped us, Tony, speed up how quickly we are able to use Gen AI at the company. Otherwise, you would have to build this from ground up, each business unit at a time. And we went from essentially taking months to be employing Gen AI to a matter of weeks.
That's really cool. Can you share how you've used like data-driven strategies to directly impact the engagement and like revenue growth at Credit Karma?
Absolutely. So I would say that a lot of the engagement and revenue growth at Credit Karma historically has been around the data that we have, as mentioned, about our members, but also these recommendation systems that ultimately surface relevant offers for our members, not only within the app, but also across channels for marketing purposes, email and push are included. So whenever, for instance, we build these systems, we think very holistically about what we like to say a win-win-win scenario. We want to make sure that we build the optimization for these systems with the member goal in mind. We also need to think about the partners, and we also need to think about Credit Karma. So we are operating in a marketplace, two-sided for that matter. So oftentimes our data is built in a way, and our systems, especially recommendation systems, are built in a way that we have optimizations that touch all these three key pillars that enable us to essentially surface the right offers for our members.
And in your opinion, like, what's your process for like prioritizing AI use cases when you have limited resources, but like just a lot of potential applications? I know at like a lot of companies, they have a million and one use cases, but not a lot of like resources. What's like what in your opinion, what's like the best route to take?
Absolutely. So, of course, first and foremost, you want to take a look at what the mission is for your company and what is your vision that you want to put in place. Something that we are galvanized across is what we call done for you experiences. So, given especially what's happening externally with AI, we want to be able to build experiences for our members that are doing things on their behalf. And getting closer and closer to that vision is one avenue through which we prioritize the efforts for the company. But of course, that oftentimes takes a lot of evolution of research and trial and error. And in addition to doing this work, we also have to run the business. So you have to think about allocating the resources within your organization for doing that as well. So it depends on each company, but you typically have a delineation of resources that run the business, that do more innovative aspects that are critical for staying competitive. And then you oftentimes also have a section or subcomponent of your organization taking in asks that might not fall into either one of those buckets. So you have to have a healthy delineation between those three to make sure that you move the needle on each.
And then in your opinion, like what's emerging right now for trends that you're seeing that has like the biggest impact on the financial services in the next, say, 3 years?
Absolutely. So, of course, like the talk of the year has been agentic workflows. And this is very prevalent, especially for the fintech industry, because as I just mentioned, one of our big bets at Intuit is building done for you experiences. And that means, and that can be very nicely coupled in with an agentic workflow, if you can start depicting the path and taking care of tasks on behalf of our members through that integration. But of course, that's just one of the pieces that are prevalent. There's many other elements that we are leaning into, as mentioned, contextualization, building trust, education, and providing guidance. Now, using the strengths of LLMs in summarization and natural language is top of mind for us as well.
And then like last question, how do you balance AI driven personalization in like a heavily regulated industry like yours with like regulatory compliance and consumer privacy and like the financial space?
So tying this back to the previous point around evaluation frameworks, it's really, really critical to invest in building evaluation frameworks that are central to your stack. And upon doing so, you want to be able to transition as much of the human tasks. As you mentioned, there's always going to be a human in the loop, but as much as possible, transition the human tasks to a very advanced LLM. For instance, we used OpenAI's most advanced model to be able to be checking some of the guidelines that need to be met with respect to compliance, safety, and some of the other metrics that I depicted for you earlier. But of course, we always need a human in the loop to like double check that that's actually working well. But the goal is to have a smaller percentage of checkpoints sought out or being reviewed by humans and more automated so that you can start balancing and automating into ensuring that you still have that very robust evaluation framework while making best use of the human input so that you can move along and speed up innovation in a highly regulated space.
Well, thanks, Maddie, so much for being on the show. And until next time, stay curious.